Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where I write a game engine from scratch. At this point we are able to run the level editor and open the projects, game projects. We can add scenes or remove them from our project, and we can undo and redo those actions. Today I would like to continue where we left off and start working on the game entities, the objects that define our game world, and the components of those entities. Here in my design of the user interface for the world editor, we can see that there is a list of game objects, game entities that can be objects in the world, or cameras, or lights, or other types of entities. And each object has a list of components, at least one component, which is a transform component. And the transform component is just the position information of the object in the game world. And depending on what type of entity we have here, they can have other types of components as well. So today I would like to start defining these classes and the user interface for listing all these objects and adding and removing them from the scene, and see how far we can come today. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing I want to add to this project is actually the ability to use hotkeys instead of pushing buttons for undo, redo, and define a new command for saving our project as well. Just to warm up, because those are pretty easy. Here I can go in our world editor and give it some input bindings. So all this does is say that whenever the user presses Control Z, this command will run, which is the undo command. So I can define one more for the redo as well, which I assigned the Control Y key to. And I will make one more for saving the project with Control and S. And I would like to rename these commands to make it clear that they are commands. So I'll just append command to their name. Here in project, I can rename those as well. And I'll add one more command for saving the project. The definition for save command is pretty easy. We just call the save method from project. So we just call this method. And because I renamed these add scene and remove scene commands as well, I have to go back here where we use them and rename them as well. So because these are key bindings, that means we need keyboard focus to this user control to be able to use them. Otherwise, these key strokes aren't detected. So the first thing I have to do is to set the control to focusable, so it can get focus. And I need to give it focus when it is loaded as well. Right away, we can see these dotted line, dashed line. That means that the control has now focus. And now I can add scenes and remove a couple of them. And when I press Ctrl Z, we can see the actions being undone, and Ctrl Y will redo them. And now I can also save the project, but we haven't got any indication here that we saved the project. So I'll just set a breakpoint here in projects save method to see if it gets called whenever we save the project. So I'll press Ctrl S, and yes, we are in this method now. So the project is saved. And next time we open the same project, we probably see all those scenes as well. See what is going on. Again, I'm going to set a breakpoint here. Add a couple of scenes and save. So we have this project, and the full path of the project doesn't seem to be correct. Apparently, we made a mistake. I made a mistake of defining this full path in a wrong way. So in our documents, Primal project, instead of saving the project file in the project folder, it's saving it in a level higher. So here, yes, this path is just the root of all our projects. And I still need to append the name of the project to it. And now when I save the project, I can see the right path is being used. That's good. And now when I reopen it, I should see those scenes in the project. Of course, Visual Studio will crash on me. Okay. So let's open the project again and see if it was saved correctly this time. Yeah, I can see that all the scenes are here. And now for some reason I lost the focus to this editor, and therefore the undo redo action didn't work for a while until I used these grid splitters to give back focus to this window. So for example, if I do this and then in some cases we just lose focus. And one way to fix that is to check whenever the undo redo action, undo redo list is changed. We give the focus back to the user element. And that's useful because sometimes we, as a result of an undo action, one UI element that had the focus will be removed from the user interface, and the entire user interface loses focus and is not able to detect keyboard strokes anymore. So the way I want to fix that is just to, after each undo action, I give the focus back to the user element, basically. For some reason, it didn't close the editor. Let me see. Names. Okay, that works again. Next, I would like to start adding the game entity class, so we can start working on the game entities. I'll create a new folder. And here I'll add the class for the game entity. It will be also the view model for the UI representation of the game entity. So I'll have it inherit from view model. Okay, so an entity has a name. And it has a parent scene. This is the scene that contains this object. And whenever we want to construct a game entity, we just give it the scene that in which it will be contained. Of course, it will also have a list of components, as I said before. So again, we will have an observable collection, a private observable collection that has the list of components. So we don't have a class components. Add that as well. Again, inherit from view model base. A component has an owner, which is the game entity. And we need to give it this game entity whenever we want to construct one such component. Okay, going back to the game entity, I'm going to have a public read-only observable collection. And we need to have a list of game entities in the scene as well. So I go back to the scene class and add a list of game entities here. Of course, I need to make all classes have the same accessibility. Here in game entity, I should set the accessibility to public. or make all other classes internal. That could work as well, but it doesn't really matter in this case. Now I need to save my game entities whenever we save the project as well. So again, we have to use an attribute, a data member attribute, and give this a name other than, which is here, underscore game entity. It isn't strictly necessary, but I think it's more readable if I ever would need to open this XML file and look for game entities. Now, because I'm saving game entities, the class itself should also use the data contract to be able to get serialized and deserialized for save and for saving and loading. And of course, the components need to have a custom name as well. So let's define such components to see how we can save and load those kind of components. Here, I'll add another class for transform component. And this one inherits from component. Because the component doesn't have a default constructor, we need to have a constructor for transform as well. And for now, all the transform is just a couple of 3D vectors which contain the position, rotation, and scale of this object. And of course, I need to save this as well. So I'm going to use the data contract attribute again. So in order to add a game entity to our scene, I'm just going to create a button that we can use to add a game entity to our scene. So here in how scenes are displayed, we already have a remove scene button next to the scene name. And here I'll just add another button. And of course, I need to define commands that add and remove game entities for me. So let's define those in the scene class. And it's basically the same as in the project, where we have these add scene commands. Now we should use add and remove game entity. So I can just copy paste basically this to the scene. And here I need again a on the serialization. Let's copy paste all of this. So we again have a list of read-only observable collection of game entities. And we need to set that up. And this needs to be private set. So we can set it in a private method. Now again, we need two methods to be able to add and remove entities. Now this is a bit different from how we did it in project. In project, we have this add scene. I'll rename this as well because they don't need to have internal appended to their name anymore because we have different names now. So here in add scene, we just gave the name of the scene and the method creates the scene for us. That's because we just have one type of scene here and we know it's a scene and the only piece of data that we need is the name of the scene and we can create it here ourselves. In case of the game entity, we will have different kind of entities. So we don't know which one we are requested to create. So I think depending on what option the user will choose, what kind of entity the user wants to choose, we have in the code behind where this entity is created, we can have different buttons, for example, or different menu options to choose the kind of game entity that we need to create. And there we create the game entity and then pass it to the scene. So that's why the scene already has an entity. So this game entity will be the base class for other kinds of entity. So we can pass any kind of entity to this function. So here I make sure that the entity that we are talking about is not already in the list of game entities. We don't want to have duplications in there. And the remove game entity is the reverse. So we check that the entity is in the list of game entities and then we remove it. So here in add entity command, because we need an argument, a parameter for this method to be an entity, the relay command will contain this information. So it will give us a game entity. This X will be this entity. And then we can use it to add this entity to the list. Now because I already have a reference to this new entity, I don't need another one to it, so I can remove this. And I need to remember its index. Now again, I'll need to define the undo and redo actions that we can use whenever we want to undo this action. And then we said that we added the entity with this name to the scene with this name. Of course, this command doesn't exist yet. I'm going to add it here. So this is just the same as here, but in reverse order. I can just copy paste that like so, and then put it here. So now I remember where this entity was before it was removed, and then I remove it, and whenever I want to undo it, I insert it to where it was, and for redoing it, I remove it again. there isn't a can execute predicate for this one, so I can remove this. And here in the constructor of a scene, I still have to call this function. So this is in case we are creating a scene by user action. And whenever we load the project, the scenes are created by deserialization, and the deserialization will call this method to initialize the scene. So basically, we have to do this for each class that we want to save in a project. That means that we have to do that eventually for these components as well. Whenever we have a button to add or remove components, we need to have those commands defined here as well, and then assign a relay command to them. For now, I think we are good. I'm just going to continue this, the button that will allow us to add a game entity. And here, instead of this border, I'll have the list of game entities that we created. So I'll remove this, and this is a list box now. I want this list box to be active only when the scene is active. So we can't remove or add any objects to it when the scene is not active. So again, here the same holds for this button. We can't add entities to inactive scenes. I want to be able to select multiple game entities. That's why I set the selection mode to extended. And here I define how the listbox items will look like. So how each entity will be displayed. Okay, here when we remove this game entity, we are executing the remove game entity command from the parent scene, and we are giving it as the parameter this entity, which is the data context for this particular listbox item. And whenever we want to create an entity, I'll have an event handler for that will create an entity and then execute the command to add that entity to the scene. This may be a nice trick that probably everybody knows, but in case you don't, whenever you have the name of an event handler here and you don't have the method for it yet, just press F12 and Visual Studio will create a method for you so you can fill it in. Here I'll just simply get the data context, which is the scene, and then create an entity and call the add entity command of the scene to add the entity. Remember, VM, the view model, is our scene that we need to give to the game entity, so it can set its parent scene. And because we are just creating a game entity that is empty, I'll just call it an empty game entity. Okay, so in our default scene, which is active, I can now add game entities. See what happens here. Game entities is null. So let's see why it is it's null. Okay, the reason, of course, is that in our templates from which we created this new project, we didn't include a list of game entities. So I think I can do that here. So basically, I'll check if the list of game entities is null. So now I have to get rid of this read-only keyword temporarily to be able to assign a new list to game entities. And then when we save this in our project, we can open the project in a text editor and see what is changed and then update the project template. So it includes a game entities list as well in the active scene. So for now, I have this list being created on runtime. Can go here and add an entity. Let's see what is going on here now. X was null. So let's go back here. In our data context, we have this command that we can use to add an entity. So let's go in here. Step through. We have here a game entity created. Our game entity list is empty, so we can add it to the entities list. That's good. I'm not sure why this is being executed twice. So what's going on? Let me see. Okay, try to do this again. We have an empty scene. And if I click this button, it's an add game entity command. Oh, yeah, this is of course wrong, because then once I'm going to execute this command in the code behind, and it's doing it again here as well. So I don't know why I did this. All right, I found the fault, which was entirely mine. There you go, my bad. I now can safely add game entities to our project. So there it is. And hopefully I didn't make the same mistake for the remove button. Yeah, this one is okay because we can just give back the entity. So I can remove it. The undo and redo work as well. Now saving the project, and I'm going to open the project and see what is added to the project regarding the list of game entities. Remove this. See, okay, here is a scene or a list of scenes. And here is what we are looking for, is the list of game entities. And I'll just, instead of having all these game entities, I'll just have this list. I don't care for these components and the game entities that we already created. I'm just including this to the template so we can have an empty list. Remember, it should be alphabetically ordered, so it should be on the top. And it's just an empty list. Okay, so I'll do this for the other kinds of templates as well. So now if I have done everything correctly, I can remove this extra line here. Now I can create a new project. And then I already will have in my scene a list of game entities, so I can add to it and I can remove the game entities. Let's see if we can also display the components that are contained in each entity in the lower right corner. I'll save this scene and go back to the class for game entities. I'll have at least one component here, which is the transform, which all game entities should have. And then again, because we are using this deserialization, I need a method that is run whenever deserialization is complete. So here I can assign this list to the read-only observable collection, like we did for the game entities and for scene. And of course, we need to have the components to be private settable, if that's a word. Open our project and see if it still works. Try to save it now And then that would save the transform component of our game entities as well. So here in the debug output of Visual Studio, I can see there is an error. It says that it cannot serialize the component. And that's right, because I need to do a couple of things. So here in the list of components, we are using polymorphism to have a list of different kinds of components. But the serializer doesn't know about these types that we are going to use for the component. There is actually something we can do to fix that. We can look for data contract serialization. For collections. And here you can read all about data contract serialization, but this part is about the collections, and there is something about how collections that use polymorphism can be saved. So here, if you look at this part of the code, for example, they are using a list of objects that could be anything. So we have to give this data contract serializer a list of types that could be in this list. So I'm going to do the same as here. I'm going to have a known type attribute and have the type of transform in there as well. Now the serializer knows that this component could be a transform, or whenever we have more component types, I'll include them here as well. I think our project file is corrupted. So let's start with a new project. I can still see that it's not working. And that's because I did one of the two things that I would do. And the other thing would be that I need all the classes in component hierarchy be serializable as well by using this data contract attribute. In component, I haven't done that yet, so I can go here, use data contract attribute and data member attribute for everything that I want to save. Can create new project, save it, and this time it succeeded. See, there are now 3 scenes and a couple of game entities in the active scene. So that is good. And I think the one more thing that I would like to do today is just start having this list of entities here in the lower right corner be visualized. To do that, I am going to add a game entity view in the world editor. So it's a user control. And all I want to do for now is to set its data context to the first game entity that we select in the list of game entities. So to do that, I'm going to here to define a public property that can be accessed from other controls. And it's just the instance to this control. And it's static. We only have one instance of this control to this view anyway, so that's okay. I'll set its data context to null, and instance is this. So it points to itself, like so. Now in project layout, I have the list box here, and whenever the selection changes, I can set the data context of this new control this new user control that I created. So here in this event argument, we have added items. Those are items that are currently selected. Or we can also use, actually we can use just the selected items from the list box itself. So I can cast the sender to the list box and use its selected items. The first one of them. Yeah, I actually want to fix the namespace of this first, so it doesn't have this world editor namespace in it. Get this instance and data context. And for now, I'll just have a stack panel here that tells me what the entity's name is. And then the list of components. So here I'll have items control. I'll use items panel. That is the stack panel again. So we'll have a list of components in a stack underneath each other. I still have to include this control in our world editor. So here in the lower left, right corner, here, I'll have one more control. In grid row 1. So it's the first, the second row of the grid. Now, whenever I select one of these, then we can see the name of the entity here, and this entity has one transform component. So that's good for now. I think this is a good place to stop for today. Next time, I'll continue working on this game entity and component display and controls, so we can have a bit of a more useful user interface here. So for example, I want to be able to rename the game entities and set the position information for this entity, for the selected entities. And later on, I want to have multi-selection as well. So right now, we are just selecting the first entity that is selected to be displayed here in the component list. But then I want to have, for example, if I select 2 entities, then I want to have the information about those 2 in the same place. So I can change the position of the 2 entities at the same time. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus, there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering.